Hello, Don in London. Part of my videos include the AA Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous, covering each chapter, and today, or this video, will be about Chapter 8, to wives. I'll then explain why it says that in a moment. But first I will share the AA preamble at the beginning of my videos. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. And by sharing experience, strength and hope from the Big Book on video, it's simply for those who cannot get to meetings, for those who don't know much about AA, or those who found it difficult to read the Big Book in early recovery, or for those who want a gentle reminder of what's in the Big Book. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. So, Chapter 8. And there's a little footnote at the beginning of the first page, if I remember rightly. Yeah, I'll just explain what it says here. The footnote. Written in 1939, when there were few women in AA, this chapter assumes that the alcoholic in the home is likely to be the husband, but many of the suggestions given here may be adapted to help the person who lives with a woman alcoholic, whether she is still drinking or is recovering in AA. A further source of help is noted on page 121, and when I get there I'll share it. So, Chapter 8, to wives. With few exceptions, our book thus far has spoke of men, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Our activities in behalf of women, or on behalf of women who drink, are on the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. But for every man who drinks, others are involved. The wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who see their son wasting away. Among us are wives, relatives and friends whose problem has been solved, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. We want the wives of alcoholics to address the wives. We want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic. As wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. We want to analyse mistakes we have made. We want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome. We have travelled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. We have had a long rendezvous with hurt, pride, frustration, self-pity, misunderstanding and fear. These are not pleasant companions. We have been driven to maudlin sympathy, to bitter resentment. Some of us veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. Our loyalty and the desire that our husbands hold up their heads and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. We have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable lies to protect our pride and our husbands' reputations. We have prayed, we have begged, we have been patient. We have struck out viciously. We have run away. We have been hysterical. We have been terror-stricken. We have sought sympathy. We have had retaliatory love affairs with other men. Our homes have been battlegrounds many an evening. In the morning we have kissed and made up. Our friends have counselled chucking the men, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. Our men have sworn off great solemn oaths that they were through drinking forever. We have believed them when no one else could or would. Then in days, weeks or months a fresh outburst. We seldom had friends at our homes. never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. We could make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. When we were invited out, our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they spoiled the occasion. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. This sounds so familiar. There was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. An armoured car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. The checking account melted like snow in June. Sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery, how cruel to be told they understood our men as we did not. The bill collectors, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, and even the ladies they sometimes brought home. Our husbands thought we were so inhospitable. Joy killer, nag, wet blanket, that's what they said. Next day they would be themselves again, and we would forgive and try to forget. We have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. We have told small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realised. They struck the children, kicked out the door panels, smashed treasured crockery, and ripped keys out of pianos. In the midst of such pandemonium, they must have rushed out threatening to live with the other woman forever. In desperation we have even got tight ourselves. The drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husband seemed to like it. Perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticised by our husband's parents for desperation. Usually we did not leave. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us and our families. We began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer. The alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pull of remorse, depression and inferiority that settled down on our loved ones, these things terrified and distracted us. As animals on a treadmill, we have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. Most of us have entered the final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals and jails. Sometimes there was screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near. Under these conditions we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. Sometimes we sensed dimly that we were dealing with sick men. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. How could men who loved their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous and so cruel? There could be no love in such persons, we thought, and just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. For a while they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. Asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse, or none. It was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men we married? When drinking they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. Even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Why was it, when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed, and then got drunk again immediately? These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband. We hope this book has answered some of them. Perhaps your husband has been living in that strange world of alcoholism, where everything is distorted and exaggerated. You can see that he really does love you with his better self. Of course there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance the alcoholic only seems to be unloving and inconsiderate. It is unusually because he is warped and sickened that he says and does these appalling things. Today most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband, no matter what he says or does. He is just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him, when you can, as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill. There is an important exception to the foregoing. We realize some men are thoroughly bad-intentioned, that no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. Don't let him get away with that. If you are positive he is one of this type, you may feel you had better leave. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children? Especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price. The problem with which you struggle usually falls within 4 categories. 1. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. Type 2. Your husband is showing lack of control, for he is unable to stay on the water wagon even when he wants to. He often gets entirely out of hand when drinking. He admits this is true, but is positive that he will do better. He has begun to try, with or without your cooperation, various means of moderating or staying dry. Maybe he is beginning to lose his friends. His business may suffer somewhat. He is worried at times and is becoming aware that he cannot drink like other people. He sometimes drinks in the morning and through the day also, to hold his nervousness in check. He is remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you what he wants to stop. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more of how he can drink moderately next time. We think this person is in danger. There are the earmarks of a real alcoholic. Perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. He has by no means ruined everything. As we say among ourselves, he wants to stop. Type 3. This husband has gone much further than husband number 2. Though once like number 2, he became worse. His friends have slipped away, his home is near wreck, and he cannot hold a position. Maybe the doctor has been called in, and the weary round of sanitariums and hospitals has begun. He admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop but cannot. His case presents additional questions which we shall try to answer for you. You can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. Husband type 4. You may have a husband of whom you completely despair. He has been placed in one institution after another. He is violent or appears definitely insane when drunk. Sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Perhaps he has had delirium tremens, the shakes, rattling, and the nightmares, or the daymares. Doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you already have been obliged to put him away. This picture may not be as dark as it looks. Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well. Goodness me, I think I was very lucky I didn't get married, because if I had a wife and I put them through these stages, because I can recognise all these stages in me, and I'm sure girlfriends in the past can recognise these stages in me, as we all can, because at one time or another, I guess if we are truly alcoholic, no matter whether we're men or women, these instances have occurred. Anyway, to continue, let's now go back to husband number 1. Oddly enough, he is often difficult to deal with. He enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Perhaps you can enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You have passed happy evenings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties which would be dull without liquor. We have enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has its advantages when reasonably used. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. Even though your husband becomes unbearable and that you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancour. Patience and good temper are most necessary. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. If he gets the idea that you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be zero. He will use that as an excuse to drink more. He will tell you he is misunderstood. This may lead to lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these circumstances. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so, no matter how hard you try. And the real truth of all of this is that if a person is drinking and is unable to control it, no amount of trying to implore them to stop is going to work, because if they had their senses, they wouldn't be drinking at all if this was happening. We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure you are not critical during such a discussion, and this is how it is when we are trying to help any alcoholic who feels they need recovery or might need recovery. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. When a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book, or at least a chapter on alcoholism. Tell him that you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say you do not want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health. Thus you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject, but after a friendly talk your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. And you could have hit me over the head with a brick, and I still wouldn't have got the message. This is me, not what's in the book. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. The same principles which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. But after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or for anyone else. Just would he like to. The chances are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. Show him that as alcoholics the writers of the book understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories you have read. If you think he will be shy of the spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Then perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. If he is enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or thinks he is not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men much like himself have recovered. But don't remind him of this after he has been drinking, for he may be angry. Sooner or later you are likely to find him reading the book once more. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act, for the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed. In other words, anybody who is an alcoholic tends to have a stubborn and defiant attitude that they will sort it out for themselves, that they will be able to use their willpower, whereas I thought I could use my willpower, and of course my willpower always failed me. Self-will ran riot and became self-obsession. It's bleak, isn't it? Anyway, continuing. If you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck, but being certain he wants to stop, you can go to him with this volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, and I'm smiling inwardly, because what alcoholic really wants to stop? But he is practically sure to read the book, and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. But the problem is, these days, that we actually have enough self-awareness to know when we've got a drinking problem. I mean, the good news is that AA has been around at least, was it 1933? 1939 this book was read, so that's 71 years. So people know when they have a problem with drink. Either they can't get enough of it and life is bad without it, or they're drinking so much they just don't know how to live life at all. You would suppose that the man in the 4th classification would be quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous are like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seems certain, yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recovery. And it is true that if we actually get to AA under our own steam and start listening, we have the freedom of choice again. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. In any event, try to have your husband read this book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm if he is already committed to an institution, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business. Give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too abnormal or dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years we have been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. When we say released, it doesn't mean we've gone and released them. They've got their wits back in order to go to AA and start life again. The majority have never returned. The power of God goes deep. And if it's not God, it's good conscience, or it's simply the wisdom of others which keeps us on the sober path a day at a time. So don't be offended or put off by God, and don't be offended if you believe in God and I've just said that. Please don't be offended. Those none meant. Continuing. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, but who should be committed. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up. But of course a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves, because when you really love someone, and you see them harming themselves day in, day out, it's horrible. It's a pain beyond imagination. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Anyway, continuing. But sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother, which is, for me, living life as it is, coping with reality. If your husband is a drinker, you may probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions at your home. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. And when I read this and I look back on my childhood, I know exactly what my mother had to put up with. We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness, but you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband or partner. When you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. He may be anything but that, which is the trouble. Your new courage, good nature and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. And this is the problem, you see, and this is me just speaking as I find it for myself. It wasn't lack of willpower that was the problem. It was self-will kept me thinking I knew I could sort it out myself, and that made me more and more ill. So the more people expressed concern, the more I said, thank you for telling me, and I will sort it out myself, because that's what I was supposed to do, wasn't it? That's the danger of the malady. It tells us we haven't got the illness or the disease, but we have, and it's then when we admit and accept we can do something about it, but it takes forever. The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it is best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all round. Then that terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. Frequently you have felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick, when as a matter of fact he was tight. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he's doing. Don't become complicit. Let the husband express what they're up to. Discuss with him when he is sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again, but be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so. There is another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You are thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and the children. This experience may come to you, or you may already have had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. It may convince your husband he wants to stop drinking forever, and now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened up the path which led to the discovery of God, or simply a higher power which could restore us to sanity, which is the wisdom of those who have learned how to be sober in fellowship or wherever else. We have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problems too. We wives found that, like everybody else, we were afflicted with pride, self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person, and we were not above selfishness and or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. And this is really a reflection of how society is, because we keep up with the next door neighbours, we put on a front, We do things because we want it to look right and we want to feel right. Continuing. At first, some of us did not believe we needed this help. We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer if our husbands stopped drinking, but it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives, and this is how Al-Anon came about. When we do that, we find it solves our problems too. The ensuing lack of fear, worry and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. We urge you to try our program, for nothing will be so helpful to your husband as the radically changed attitude toward him, which God will show you how to have. Go along with your husband if you possibly can. And this isn't just me thinking about it as I'm going along. The 12 steps of the program are about spiritual progress, making spiritual progress on a daily basis. And part of spiritual progress on a daily basis is learning how to be open, honest and willing to live life on life's terms. And it's a personal choice. So in all of these recommendations to wives or partners or husbands, however it turns out, I do feel it's really important to stress it is freedom of choice always, which is sort of underpinning everything. Anyway, continuing. If you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem of drink, you are of course going to be very happy. But all problems will not be solved at once. Seed has started to sprout in a new soil, but growth has only begun. In spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs, as is life. Many of the old problems will still be with you. This is as it should be. We don't solve all our problems at once. And anyway, I shall continue reading. The faith and sincerity of both you and your husband will be put to the test. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education, for thus you will be learning to live. You will make mistakes, but if you are in earnest, they will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize them. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. Some of the snags you will encounter are irritation, hurt feelings and resentments. Your husband will sometimes be unreasonable and you will want to criticize. Starting from a speck on the domestic horizon, great thunderclouds of dispute may gather. These family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband. Often you must carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. Never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to an alcoholic. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband whenever there is an honest difference of opinion. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. And I can't imagine how difficult that is. It must be extraordinarily difficult, because if you've been living with an alcoholic for a long time and they're promising to do better and then they get resentful. If I had a wife who was like that, I know I would love her and hate the behaviour that was going on. And part of being assertive is saying, I love you, but when you do this, it really gets on my whatever. And there are ways to deal with it. I do agree. It's not about being resentful, but it is not about avoiding the truth. So, if a husband is unreasonable and does not wish to change, I cannot imagine why anybody would want to stay with them, and the other way around too. I really do understand that now. But I know I've loved people who have had the most unreasonable behaviour in the world, and I've stayed with them. And when I look back, if I had had more self-esteem myself, I would have left a lot sooner, and I would have said to myself, I don't need to be treated worse than I would treat another person. And love is a peculiar thing. Anyway, continuing. That was Don's thoughts. I am allowed. Doesn't mean it represents AA. In fact, anything I say doesn't represent AA at all. Continuing. You and your husband will find that you can dispose of serious problems easier than you can the trivial ones. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, It should be the privilege of either to smile and say, "This is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. Let's talk about it later." If your husband is trying to live on a spiritual basis, he will also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention. But it takes a long time to be truthful. It takes a long time to stop blaming other people for the anger inside us. After all, the anger is inside us about whatever is going on. Your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. He wants to make good. You must not expect too much. His ways of thinking and doing are the habits of years. Patience, tolerance, and understanding, and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. Live and let live is the rule. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other. We women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. It is the most natural thing in the world, once his liquor problem is solved, to feel that he will now measure up to that cherished vision. The chances are he will not, for like yourself, he is just beginning his development. Be patient. Another feeling we are very likely to entertain is one of resentment that love and loyalty could not cure our husbands of alcoholism. We do not like the thought that the contents of a book or the work of another alcoholic has accomplished in a few weeks that for which we struggled for years. At such moments we forget that alcoholism is an illness over which we could not possibly have had any power. And I think that is true, because if the husband, as it says in this case, couldn't control the drinking, even when they wanted to, what chance has a third party, somebody outside the relationship of man and drink? Your husband will be the first to say it was your devotion and care which brought him to the point where he could have a spiritual experience. Without you, he would have gone to pieces long ago. When resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count your blessings. After all, your family is reunited, alcohol is no longer a problem, and you and your husband are working together toward an undreamed of future. Still, another difficulty is that you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics. You have been starving for his companionship, yet he spends long hours helping other men and their families. You feel he should now be yours. The fact is that he should work with other people to maintain his own sobriety. Sometimes he will be so interested that he becomes really neglectful. Your house is filled with strangers. You may not like some of them. He gets stirred up about their troubles, but not at all about yours. It will do little good if you point that out and urge more attention for yourself. We find it a real mistake to dampen his enthusiasm for alcoholic work. You should join in his efforts as much as you possibly can. We suggest that you direct some of your thought to the wives of his new alcoholic friends. They need the counsel and love of a woman who has gone through what you have. It is probably true that you and your husband have been living too much alone, for drinking many times isolates the wife of an alcoholic. Therefore, you probably need fresh interests and a great cause to live for as much as your husband. If you cooperate rather than complain, you will find that his excess enthusiasm will tone down. Both of you will awaken to a new sense of responsibility for others. You, as well as your husband, ought to think of what you can put into life instead of how much you can take out. Inevitably, your lives will be fuller for doing so. You will lose the old life to find one much better. Perhaps your husband will make a fair start on the new basis, but just as things are going beautifully, he dismays you by coming home drunk. If you are satisfied he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as has been true with many of our men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. Your husband will see at once that he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. You need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He will know it. Cheer him up and ask him how you can be still more helpful. The slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. In a weak moment he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. And it's always the trivial stuff which seems to catch us out. We never try to arrange a man's life so as to shield him from temptation. The slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted will be noticed. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. And this is the ultimate freedom, to come and go as we both like. This is important. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. Indeed, don't. Never blame yourself for another person's drunk. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then you and your husband can get right down to fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem, along with everything else, in God's hands. And, God works through people, so we get the wisdom of the people around us, because we've opened up and said, I'm living with an alcoholic, what can I do? And then how to get advice. So this is why this chapter is really important to wives, because it's not you do it on your own and put up with a bad husband. You are working together and hopefully resolving how to both have freedom of choice. Continuing though, we realise that when we have been giving you as much direction and advice, we may have seemed to lecture. If that is so, we are sorry, for we ourselves don't always care for people who lecture us. But what we have related is based upon experience, some of it very painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we are anxious that you understand and that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties. And there's an asterisk here, which is the footnote. Well, what it says finally, so to you out there who may be soon with us, we say good luck and God bless you. And the footnote is about Al-Anon. The Fellowship of Al-Anon family groups was formed about 13 years after this chapter was written. Though it is entirely separate from Alcoholics Anonymous, it uses the general principles of the AA program as a guide for husbands, wives, relatives, friends and others close to alcoholics. The foregoing pages, though addressed only to wives, indicates the problems such people may face. Alateen, for teenage children of alcoholics, is a part of Al-Anon. If there is no Al-Anon listing in your local telephone book, you may obtain further information on Al-Anon Alateen family groups by writing to its World Service Office, which is on the internet now. So if you're seeing this on the internet, then you can find all the Al-Anon information by country. And my philosophy in this is, it's a personal choice always, as a wife or a husband or somebody who is being affected by the alcoholic. Freedom of choice to choose, but know if the alcoholic can't stop themselves drinking and they are seriously wanting or have a desire to get sober, there is help out there, and being supportive can be very, very helpful. But the alcoholic always has to make that choice and learn how to be sober. And part of the learning how to be sober is the new person that emerges as a partner or part of the family. And that can be extraordinarily difficult, because all the resentments that have built up over the years trying to help this person, and suddenly they seem to have found a fellowship which does it all and then brings them back anew with a newfound confidence, can actually be very rattling for anybody around them. That's the end of chapter 8. And at the end of these videos I will share the Serenity prayer. It's about accepting there is the power greater than us in the world, and often that is the wisdom of other people. So whether you have a faith which is based on God, or simply a faith in the good of life, or simply faith in doing the next right thing, the Serenity prayer seems to me of key importance. So it's not religious based, it's more faith based, based on what is true, what is real. So to God or good conscience, as you choose or come to understand, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the rest of the world. Courage to change the things I can, me and my attitudes. And the wisdom to know the difference. Seems to me it happens just for today.